Corporation for National and Community Service. As part of our work with the corporation, we are kind of hosting or help host a couple of webinars on prisoner reentry. Partners in an initiative that the corporation has with the Department of Justice on prison read and feed sites include, obviously, the Department of Justice Community Capacity Development Office. They're training and technical assistance provider for Winston-Salem State University Center for Community Safety, and again, National Crime Prevention Council on the corporation side. Helping the Center for Community Safety on their work on this initiative is the Urban Institute, and I am glad to welcome Nancy Lavine from the Urban Institute, who will be presenting on crime mapping. Before I hand over the floor to Nancy, I just kind of want to do a brief welcome and kind of let people know that since we do the audio portion of this is a conference call, I would appreciate for you to mute your calls while Nancy is speaking. If you have a question, there is a little hand that is on your screen that you can use at any time to raise your hand. That will let me know as a moderator that you do have a question. We also will have plenty of opportunity for questions and answers towards the end of the presentation. So if you don't have a mute button on your phone, please press *6 to mute your phone for this call. And to unmute your phone, you can press *7. So *6 to mute, *7 to unmute. Thank you very much. And with that, I will hand the floor over to Nancy.
Well, thank you, Jean. I guess we can start the PowerPoint presentation now. Excellent. And I can see it perfectly, so I'm assuming others can see it as well. You can just forward to the next slide. I have a lot of ground to cover today, but some of it I'm going to go over pretty quickly because I have a sense that a lot of folks who are joining us today really understand the issues surrounding reentry already, and perhaps they're even doing some of their own mapping of this issue. So I'm going to go through this at a pretty steady pace, and I'll pause for a minute so you can answer this question from Jean.
Wow, it looks like everyone's already involved in prisoner reentry work. That's fantastic.
That is great. As I suspected, which is why I'm going to run through why we care about reentry pretty quickly and get into more about why we should map reentry and various examples of that, including the work of the Reentry Mapping Network, which is a group of folks all over the country who are doing this kind of work, and some of the lessons they've learned that I'd like to share with all of you. So you can go to the next slide. You will see, should look familiar. Yes. Who has been to a presentation on reentry who hasn't seen this or something like it? Why should we care about reentry? Well, one of the reasons is because we've observed a huge increase in both people being admitted to prison and people being released over time. Nationwide, it's been a fourfold increase over just the last couple of decades. Next slide, please. And we also know from our own experiences with this population that they face a lot of different types of challenges when they leave prison and return to their homes and communities. I tend to put substance abuse towards the top of the list because national estimates suggest that almost 2/3 of people leaving prison have some kind of history with drug use or alcohol use or abuse. We also know that it's often tied to mental health issues, and there's also physical health issues that this population is faced with, including much higher than average rates of infectious diseases and a lot of common diseases like asthma, hypertension, challenge as well. Um, Very low skill levels, low educational attainment. If they're lucky, they get some kind of preparation to hit the job market upon release. But that's really not often the case. Housing can often be an issue, as well as reuniting with family and issues of child care and child support arrearages that can accrue during the time of incarceration. We also know that, unfortunately, most people who come out of prison end up back in within just a few short years.
Nancy, I think we have some background noise, and I think it might be your speakerphone.
This is not me.
We have a little bit of static.
I don't think that's my phone. I mean, there was a phone ringing in the background.
Yeah, I just wanted to repeat again.
Yeah.
Please press *6 to mute your phone. If you don't have a mute button on your phone, so we can make sure that everyone can hear Nancy well. And if you want to unmute your phone at any time, please press *7. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. So if you can go to the next slide. Okay, so we know the broad brushstrokes about reentry. So I'm going to turn and talk a little bit about how reentry affects communities. What we know is that people being released from prison tend to congregate in certain regions across the country, and they usually end up predominantly in major metropolitan areas. And this isn't particularly surprising when one considers that's where most of the general population lives as well. What's more striking is when you look at some of these urban areas and see how the large majorities of people end up there over time when they're released from prison. So in Illinois, if everyone released statewide, just over half end up in Chicago, and even higher percentages of people released from Maryland state prisons end up in Baltimore. And you can see that even in places where those percentages are lower, they're still quite significant. And we know that the communities to which a lot of prisoners end up returning are disadvantaged compared to other parts of these urban areas. They're more likely to have families living in poverty, more likely to have people who are unemployed, and they're less likely to have the wherewithal to provide the support that returning prisoners need to succeed. And that can have implications to the community, so that returning prisoners can affect their communities, but also the well-being of the community can affect their reentry outcomes. So here's just one example. If you look in the state of Maryland, this is just the share of people returning to different parts of Maryland. You see that dark part in the center is Baltimore City. What we know is that 6.8 prisoners per 1,000 residents are in Baltimore City, and that compares statewide to 1.4 prisoners per 1,000 residents. So already you're seeing a concentration. But the next slide you'll see shows even pockets of concentrations within cities. So this is the city of Baltimore, and here you see even within the city they're not equally distributed across the urban landscape with a couple different pockets of concentration. And if you look at the next map, you'll see that even within one smaller community area, all these light and dark red splotches represent places where released prisoners returned to, and just those released in calendar year 2001. This is a rather old map. Apologies for that. But I can tell you the patterns haven't changed much over time. And you'll see, if you look in the corner of North and Charles, which is sort of in the upper right-hand or middle to right area there, pretty much central downtown Baltimore, that one red splotch represents 15 released prisoners. Overall, all the light and dark red splotches on this map represent 560 released prisoners. But that's just for 1 year alone. So if you imagine this accruing over time, you can see how certain pockets of neighborhoods are really experiencing reentry a lot more than others. we can imagine how that would have an impact on not just the residents there, but the families of people who are receiving returning prisoners, and the children and the entire environment. So you can see how this is truly a community issue. Next slide, please. So now we're going to turn and talk about, so we know it's a community issue, why should we map it? And you go to the next slide. We've used mapping to answer a lot of different types of reentry questions. So where they are returning is critical, of course, if you want to do anything in the way of understanding where services should be, or whether existing services need to be improved upon and expanded. And you can also understand more what the neighborhoods look like in terms of their own both risks and assets, and I'll get to an example of that later, as well as how communities might be affected by prisoner reentry. So now I'm going to just run through a bunch of different examples, and they really run the gamut. Some of them are more focused on what I would call surveillance and more traditional policing approaches to reentry, so understanding where people are returning because they present risks to public safety. And others are more focused on how can we help this population. And, you really need to look at all sides of it. So here's an example of a map that was produced in San Diego, and it just shows where former prisoners are in relation to crimes. And one of the reasons I find this interesting is because there's not a one-for-one correlation between the two, but nonetheless it can help in both crafting prevention interventions as well as supporting investigation efforts. The next map.
Sorry, I'm a little slow. I'm trying to do more than one thing at the same time.
Stop checking those emails.
No.
I'm just teasing. So here's an example of how you might want to use it to assign caseloads. This is in Baltimore County. This is an actual caseload of one parole officer. And as you can see here, this officer is going to have a hard time making home visits to all these people because they're scattered all over the county. So it would make more sense to allocate caseloads in geographic areas so that your parole officers don't have to go all over creation to make home visits. And even more importantly, in the interest of community corrections, really understanding the resources and the risks in the specific areas where prisoners are returning, it's a lot easier to get a command of an area if you're in one specific area rather than going all over the place. Next slide, please. So here's another example. We know a lot about issues of sex offenders, and there's a lot of areas that they're prohibited from living in and going to. Different jurisdictions handle this in different ways. In San Diego, parole officers were using this is a little bit graphic, but they were actually using what are informally known as pee cups, the cups that are used to take urine samples for drug tests. They discovered that the pee cups, if you use the standard paper Thomas map, were about, the radius of them was about a half a mile wide. And so they'd actually take these and draw them around schools and hand draw circles and then try to see if any of their sex offenders were in the wrong place. Well, then they discovered computerized mapping and realized that they could, use technology to their advantage and discard the pee cups and actually generate lists of people who are in prescribed areas. Next map, please. Oh, here's a great example of how maps can also be used to correct misperceptions about the threat of returning prisoners on public safety. Here's the same map of Baltimore City that you saw earlier, and what I've done is drawn boxes, red boxes, over the areas that have the highest concentrations, just so you can keep those in your mind's eye. The next slide, next map, shows nothing because it skipped over one somehow. Okay, yes. The next the next one shows those same boxes so you can remember where the concentrations are, but this shows Part 1 crimes per 1,000 residents, and you can see that there's not at all a one-for-one correlation here. Now, that can be explained by any number of things. I mean, it could be, if I match drug offenses, you would see a one-for-one correlation. But I also think it's useful when you're talking about reentry with community members. You don't want to just incite fears. You want to talk about the public safety risks, but also ways to help people succeed so that they don't commit new crimes. And you don't really get people supporting positive service provision types of activities for former prisoners if they're just thinking that returning prisoners means more crime. So these kinds of maps can be useful as well. Now the next map is looking at developing violence prevention strategies. This is also from San Diego. This is just one part of San Diego, City Heights, that has a very, very diverse population. And what you see here is a map of all the probationers who have gang affiliations by their ethnicities, which is used as a proxy for gang. And you can see not only the diversity, but you can also use it for law enforcement efforts to anticipate some areas of potential turf conflicts. Next map, please. And mapping can also be used to understand community context. Unfortunately, this is not appearing that great. You can't really see the table at the bottom, but basically the table at the bottom ranks zip codes by sociodemographic status, from the lowest status to the highest, and basically the most disadvantaged to the least disadvantaged. And what you see here is the areas that have the highest numbers of parolees are 5 of the 7 areas that are most disadvantaged. And that's great. That helps a little bit. And now if we can go to the next slide.
It's moving a little slow. I apologize.
It's okay. Sure, everyone's furiously taking notes anyway. That was a joke.
No, I'm sure they are.
Okay, so, all right, here is an example from our own Center for Community Safety. And they are one of our reentry mapping network sites, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But one of the things they did, which I thought was really fabulous, was to do a pretty detailed, they looked in just one weed and seed area, and I always recommend that if pick off a smaller chunk to start with. Don't try mapping everything at once. And so they focused in on the northeast weed and seed area, and we're looking to map both assets, like available jobs and positive things in the community, as well as some of the more negative aspects of the area, including different kinds of measures of disadvantage that you might not get just through census data. And one of the things they did was to map where the abandoned and boarded up buildings were and identify just a whole slew of them in this area, and use that to start a conversation with some construction people who were demolishing and interested in demolishing and rebuilding these structures. And the partnership led to the hiring of a lot of ex-prisoners. And so this great example of how this map led to both improving the overall community, but also providing jobs for returning prisoners.
I think we have a question from Zelda Faulkner.
Yes, Zelda? maybe someone just clicked by accident.
Okay.
Happy to answer any questions along the way, though.
Okay. Do you have a question and you muted your phone? Please make sure to press *7 to unmute your phone. Okay. I guess we will move on.
Okay, next slide, please. Mapping has also been used to identify service locations. Here's one example of that in San Diego County. The next slide should be another example. Related example of coordinating service provision. This is from Brooklyn, New York, and here you see incarcerated residents in relation to TANF recipients. And lo and behold, there is a huge overlap there. Just one example of how a lot of different agencies are dealing with the same populations or the families of the same populations. And it suggests that more coordination could be very fruitful. Next slide. Oh, here was the one I was thinking of. Another example of gaps in service delivery. Now, this is Chicago that has a very good transportation network. But nonetheless, we were surprised to see when we mapped all services that specifically stated that they served ex-offenders. What we learned is if you see sort of the concentrations in West Englewood and Englewood, not one service provider was located in that neighborhood. Now, it could be that it's easy enough for folks from those neighborhoods to get to the services, but and it probably raises more questions than it answers. But I think it raises really good questions, and questions that can go further than just are there service providers located in certain areas, but even if they are there, do they have the capacity to serve everybody, and also what the quality of their services are. Next slide, please. Here's another issue related to transportation networks. Jean, is there any way you can make this a little bit bigger?
I will in a second.
Okay, thank you.
Just cut off a little bit.
It cuts off a little bit. But what this is showing, this is one group called the Second Chance Employment Program in San Diego. And it shows the residences of people in this employment program and then where the actual employers are. And a lot of these folks are traveling about 20 miles each way. And it just showed us, wow, you know, this could be one of the biggest challenges and explain a lot why even when you find jobs for this population, their job retention could be really, really low because of the challenges in getting just from point A to point B. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the reentry mapping network and then talk about some of their experiences.
And we're going to have a polling question.
Okay.
Okay, it looks like most people are not currently using mapping.
That's good to know, and I'm one of the people who said I was, and I don't even count. So,
So it looks like we have about 33% who are, and about 6%
great. You know, if we have time for discussion afterwards, I'd like to hear more about the folks who, well, both who are and who aren't using mapping and how we can get you there. So, if we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so the reentry mapping network started about almost 5 years ago. We've received funding mostly from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, a little bit of funding from the National Institute of Justice. It was designed for us, the Urban Institute, to work with partners around the country to assist them in collecting and mapping reentry-related data, and perhaps even more importantly, to use those maps and those analyses to engage the community and to help inform different kinds of reentry efforts on the ground. Our job at the Urban Institute is also to develop resources for all kinds of people who are interested in replicating this kind of approach, and we do have some information that I'll direct you to at the end of this presentation. So this map is outdated. This shows 12 reentry mapping network sites. We've got 2 more that just started this month, Chicago and Atlanta. But they are spread all over the country, pretty much. And this is just an example of some of the sites, the first 6 sites, and it's a lot to digest. I don't really expect you to look at all the detail of them, but just to say that each one of them tended to take on a different kind of issue. Probably the most common issue that across all sites is to look at service provision and the service delivery gaps that may exist with this population. But others look specifically at issues of family impact, employment, and other kinds of issues that might affect, looking at Providence Plan, residential mobility and so forth. The next slide. I was going to tell you a little bit about what they learned. Oh, another survey question. Okay, so it looks like those of you are doing a couple different things. A lot of crime data mapping, some community data. A few of you are doing all kinds of mapping of data, both crime data, corrections data, as well as service provider information. That's good to know. So, some of the challenges that our reentry mapping network sites have encountered, a lot of them have to do with getting the reentry data to begin with. Navigating an often bureaucratic Department of Corrections, that's typically where this data is housed. On occasion, you also need to go to a separate agency if you're looking for supervision data, like from the parole department. Some states, they're one entity, and others, they're 2 separate agencies. Of course, if you wanted to bring in issues of jail reentry, that's a 3rd place you'd have to go. Juvenile reentry, that's typically a 4th place you have to go. And even if you just want the very basic, adult people returning from state prison, this can often be difficult because a lot of these departments of correction are really lacking staff and have antiquated systems, and even when they have a high degree of sophistication in their data systems, there's often a lot of concerns about how the data will be analyzed and who it will be shared with and how it will be disseminated. And what we found across our sites is the best way to proceed is to approach your Department of Corrections from a collaborative standpoint. You should care about this issue. We care about it. Let's join forces and work together. And you could offer to provide staff to help pull the data for them, involve them more broadly in the project rather than just asking for data and never seeing them again. And that would be in your interest anyway, I would think. And talk a lot about why it would be helpful to collect and analyze this data. and how it has impact for public safety and for improving the outcomes for people returning from prison, as well as the outcomes for their family members. Another challenge that our reentry mapping network sites faced was that of analyzing and interpreting the data. It's often really important to continue to work with your data provider so that you can understand the policy context of what you're looking at. And I'll give you a very recent example from one of our newest sites in Chicago, who requested data from the Illinois Department of Corrections, and that data request is in the works, but what I learned from talking to the fellow who extracted the data there is that they had a recent policy, they call it revoking at the door for sex offenders, and this is a way to keep sex offenders off the street, essentially. If they don't have a home plan that can be approved prior to their release, in other words, if they don't have a place to live, and Lord knows it's hard to find one with all the restrictions on where they can live, they technically get released and then they're revoked right back into prison. So he warned me, when you get this data that I give you, it's going to look like we don't have many sex offenders. That's because they're never captured in our system because they were released and put right back in prison. That's the kind of thing that you want to know when you're getting data and starting to analyze it. It's also important to gain clarity on how addresses are what we call geocoded, how you assign XY coordinates so you can see it on a computerized map. There's often issues of different types of supervision, and they get coded differently, and some people are on supervision for years, and some have what they call split sentences. And just understanding better what information is and is not available and what the nuances are with the data. And then once you generate the results of your analysis and your mapping, to again provide context to the data, and to do that with the community at the table. Here's just a few other strategies for engaging the community when you're looking at this issue and using maps. It's important to bring in the community early on so they have a seat at the table and they're invested in it, rather than they feel like this group is already in place and you're already creating these maps, and then you convene and you show them to them, and it incites fears and concerns, and often these concerns can go any number of ways. It could be concerns of victimization themselves, or it could be some animosity depending on their views of the police and how they might feel like there's too much attention on their community already, and that some people who are released from prison don't even have a chance, and they're going to just be returned to prison because they're already basically flagged for rearrest. So it's really important to get the community at the table involved and in your dialogues, and find common ground with all the partners in whatever group you're convening to talk about reentry issues. Our reentry mapping network sites did not start from scratch. All of them had either already engaged in some kind of reentry effort or decided to partner with a pre-existing effort and help extend its reach. So with that, I'll close. I could talk about this for a lot longer, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. You're free to email me if you wish. My email address is right up top there. There's also information on the Reentry Mapping Network on the Urban Institute's website. And if you go to, and there's also lots of information on reentry on our website. You'll see all those links there. And there is a publication on our website. It's our reentry mapping guidebook, and it covers everything I've talked about here and a whole lot more, and I recommend it. It's a great read if you're just getting started. And now I'll take any questions anyone might have.
Yes, I would appreciate if anyone has a question to just raise your hand, and I'll be happy to call on you, so you can go ahead and ask Nancy any questions on her presentation or on crime mapping in general. Or you can unmute your phone and go ahead and speak up. We'd appreciate hearing from you. I know I saw a couple of hands up during the presentation. Now is your time to ask any questions that you have.
While we're waiting, I'd be interested in knowing from the folks who are already engaged in reentry mapping if they had different examples from what I presented and just a little bit more about their experiences of the value of reentry mapping. I know there's 4 of you out there because you did the survey. Okay, well, you know what? There's someone who has a question. How exciting.
Please ask it.
Hello?
Yes?
Hi, I just had a question because I came in a little bit late, and I'm really, really interested because we're just starting to to think about doing community mapping as a capacity building tool for communities.
Where are you from, if you don't mind me asking?
From One Star Foundation. We're in Austin, Texas.
Oh, well, I'm working with folks in Austin a lot right now.
Oh, neat.
With Darla Gay and Bill Bryce and all those folks.
Well, we are very excited, and it will be just one of many tools that we hope to offer. But I missed the beginning part of your presentation and wanted to see if there was any way to be able to review the slides that I had missed, or if that was contained on your website, or...
We are recording this, and it will be available. We're putting together kind of a library of the web sessions that we've done so far on the NCPC, or National Crime Prevention Council website. Also, those of you who are participating or anyone who signed up for this session will be getting a follow-up email with the link to the recorded version of this.
Neat. Great. Well, thank you.
And please feel free to email me if you have any questions, especially since I am working with the roundtable folks there.
I definitely will, because we're sort of just in the planning phase of it right now, so I definitely will get in contact with you.
Good.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for asking your question.
No problem.
No more questions?